People were starting to say it's an East Coast, West Coast rivalry because it was people that's trying to make money. It was true people trying to make careers. It was people trying to get famous. And Tupac's a legend. Like I said, Tupac wasn't born, he was sent to us.
It happened just after lights out. A half second too long lingered between the buzz of the electric lock and the creak of Suge Knight's cell door swinging open. No one moved, no guard in sight, no warning. Then hell broke loose. Shadows swept in fast, blunt force, shouting muffled by flesh meeting steel. When it was over, Suge lay there, bloodied, battered, barely conscious. Bones cracked, lips split, and yet, in the eerie silence that followed, it was the missing sound that told the real story. The cameras. They hadn't caught a thing.
Named Diddy 77 times in court documents related to Tupac's.
We're talking about a man housed in one of the most secure prison wings in the state. Suge Knight, founder of Death Row Records, the architect of West Coast dominance in the 90s, attacked in what prison officials are calling an isolated incident. But insiders aren't buying it, not when the surveillance system conveniently glitched, not when the playback file was corrupted, not when the only working camera was pointed at a mop bucket. This wasn't a brawl, this was theater, a cold-blooded act staged to look like chaos. And the cast? Still unnamed, still unchecked. Because here's the thing, Suge's not just a convict. He's a walking archive of hip-hop's dirtiest secrets. And lately, he's been talking. From his prison podcast to phone calls with reporters, Knight's been stirring the pot like he's got nothing left to lose. Spilling stories most of the industry would rather stay buried. Names, deals, betrayals, and something far worse, truths that point to a cabal of power players whose influence runs so deep, even from behind bars, Suge may have gotten too close to lighting a match. The whispers grew louder after his latest bombshell. Suge claims that Shakur, the icon, the martyr, the symbol of rebellion, actually begged to be let go, not to be saved, not to fight through the bullet wounds and the agony. According to Knight, Shakur said, "I'll before I go back, he shoot me." Suge says those words were spoken in the hospital, and that Afeni Shakur Pac's own mother honored that wish. Not only that, but allegedly instructed the doctors not to revive her son when he slipped away the first time. That's the kind of revelation that bends history and breaks legacies.
The only man currently facing charges in the case, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, claims that Sean Combs, also known as Diddy, paid for a hit on Tupac.
We've heard wild rumors before. We've lived through holograms and he's alive in Cuba theories. But this came from the only man in the car with Shakur that night in Las Vegas. And if Suge's telling the truth, then the question shifts from who pulled the trigger to who let it stick. Afeni was a fiercely protective figure, beloved and respected. But what if Suge's account reveals something more calculated? A decision born not out of love, but out of resignation? Or worse, pressure? Who stood to gain from Shakur's silence?
Right now, Davis is fighting for bail ahead of his trial, which he has pleaded not guilty for.
Suge insists that it wasn't just Shakur who was scared of returning to prison. The idea of being caged again after brushing so close to freedom, power, and prophetic legacy, that alone, he says, is what broke Pac's will. But others aren't so sure. Former Death Row associates claim this is Suge trying to rewrite the narrative, blame the system, shift attention. Yet the timeline, the mood, the desperation, it does line up with Pac's legal troubles that day. There was a fight at the MGM Grand, possible charges incoming, tensions with the East Coast rising, and rumors of betrayal swirling like vultures. And this is where things get colder. Suge's not just dredging up Shakur's final wishes, he's tying them directly to the bigger power structure. On his podcast, Collect Call, he's been inching closer to outright calling out the industry for orchestrating hits, hiding evidence, and silencing voices. One episode, he flat out said that Diddy deserves jail for Shakur's end. Another time, he hinted that Dre had paid people to have him taken out. And when asked about the Combs trial, Knight didn't dance around it. He said Diddy was just part of a much larger disease.
Yes. He hated every bit of it. I remember one time, he was like, who did you grow up listening to? I'm like, Tupac. I ain't mentioned Biggie. That nigga ain't even talk to me for like 4 days after that. Everything with Pac, like, you couldn't say Pac was anything better than Biggie. You can't put them in the same realm or nothing. It was all about Biggie.
Which begs the real question, was Suge's attack retaliation for slandering these sacred cows of hip-hop? Or was it preemptive damage control by people even he hasn't named yet? Because let's not forget, this man also said someone once showed him canceled checks tied to a homicide for hire plot. He's gone after Dre, Diddy, even Afeni. He's named names that no one else would dare breathe aloud. And then suddenly he's ambushed in a facility where even toothpaste gets logged and watched. People close to the case claim Suge had recently filed for a new hearing, trying again to overturn his 28-year sentence. The court rejected it. But maybe the goal wasn't freedom, maybe it was exposure. Because buried inside that filing were allegations that his own legal team railroaded him, that the system sabotaged him, that he was virtually incommunicado before accepting the deal that put him away. One lawyer called the whole thing shocking and unconscionable. Another warned the public, if it happened to Suge, it can happen to anyone.
And that was to destroy East Coast rap. And what I mean by that, and I know people gonna be like, yo, Gene is out of his mind and everything like that. Check this out, brother.
And while all of this swirls in public, back inside that prison, Suge is surrounded by silence. No official statement from his attackers, no names, no motives, no transfers, just bruises and silence. And every time he opens his mouth on that prison phone, another thread gets pulled. Another old grudge reopens, another ghost starts whispering. When he said Puffy knows secrets on his podcast, it wasn't bravado, it was a warning. When he joked about Combs being in danger in prison, that wasn't shade, it was experience. And now, Suge knows that every sentence he speaks could be his last. Because let's not forget, Knight's name has come up at least 50 times during Diddy's ongoing human trafficking trial. Some say he's basking in the spotlight again. Others think he's laying breadcrumbs. Either way, his attacks on Combs aren't just personal. They're strategic, tied to decades of bad blood, from East Coast, West Coast feuds to whispered NDAs and shady boardroom deals. He's framing Diddy not as the lone monster, but as a symptom, just one infected piece of a poisoned system.
They did not want East Coast rappers to get big. They were suppressing all new artists that was coming out of New York. Jay and Diddy was doing that.
And now, with his own body broken from an incident that's looking more like a hit with every new detail, Suge Knight might be running out of time to talk. But that's never stopped him before. In fact, it's only made him louder. He's not just painting himself as the villain, he's inching toward martyrdom. The power-hungry mogul who once crushed rivals with a phone call is now cast as a prophet, screaming into the storm, while the very industry he helped build tightens the noose.
Because him and Diddy was given that deal, we gotta keep these East Coast rappers down. Because down south rappers, Cash Money, No Limit, Ludacris and them, they was taking little money and bringing back more money and making more money for them.
But why now? Why the escalation? Could it be the Shakur files reopening? Could it be Keefe D's upcoming trial and the names he might still drop? Or are we watching a final act unfold? One man spilling everything before the curtain comes crashing down? We don't know who orchestrated the attack on Suge Knight, but we do know this. It was clean, efficient, and left no trail. And in the cold calculus of power, that's not vengeance, that's containment. And then there's the Tams burgers incident, what some are now calling the homicide burger setup. Suge Knight may be serving time for manslaughter, but his version of what happened in that Compton parking lot reads less like a reckless act and more like an ambush scripted by people with something to lose. Suge didn't hesitate when naming names. He claims he was lured there under the pretense of meeting with Dre, the same man he once helped elevate to icon status. According to Suge's sworn testimony, a call came in from a mutual contact saying Dre wanted to make peace, a meeting of minds to finally squash the tension born out of years of legal fights and whispered threats. But when Suge showed up, what he found instead was fists flying and minutes later, a man lying still beneath his wheels.
They was not scared of Suge Knight. They was terrified of Suge Knight.
Suge insists he acted in fear, reacting to an ambush. And then came the real bombshell that Dre had allegedly hired someone to take him out, not just once, but possibly twice. Suge testified under oath that someone had shown him voided checks linked to an alleged homicide for hire scheme. He told the court, "I was told that he had paid some guys to harm me." Now, pause on that. Because if even a sliver of that is true, then the incident at Tams wasn't just a tragedy, it was a trap. A high-stakes power move staged in broad daylight, wrapped in plausible deniability, and filmed just a few blocks from the set of Straight Outta Compton. The same movie that reignited the Dre Knight tension in the first place? It all circles back to that day at the production office. Suge showed up, he was turned away. Minutes later, someone called him back. They're trying to take care of you. Suge said the caller told him, Dre's gonna come by. Instead, what he got was Bone, Sloan throwing punches, a car window smashed, and Suge gunning the engine. It's easy to paint this as a hot-headed decision from a man with a violent past, but Suge paints it differently. A setup, a coordinated strike by people who wanted him either locked up or laid out. Either way, out of the picture.
2 weeks ago, I'm outside my office. My assistant comes up and says, Suge Knight wants to speak to you from jail. I said, who? He said, Suge Knight. The Suge? Yes. Gotta be kidding me. No.
And we can't ignore the fact that the same narrative keeps surfacing, that Dre, from a distance, orchestrated chaos while keeping his own hands clean. Suge said authorities told him Dre was behind the 2014 nightclub shooting when Suge was hit 7 times at a pre-VMA party. He said people showed him checks. Again, documents, canceled checks, evidence that's never been produced in court but whispered about constantly behind the scenes. Could this feud between two titans have spilled so far out of control that it blurred into something darker, something far more methodical? The industry has never been kind to loose ends, and Suge, for all his firepower, has increasingly become just that, a dangling wire sparking in the dark. Even from a cell, he's still pulling back the curtain, not just on Dre, not just on Diddy, but on the entire machine. He said before that Puffy didn't just come up with those ideas on his own. He's calling out a culture that, for decades, has thrived on fear, secrets, and silent deals. And now, he's not playing along, which brings us to something that still feels surreal, even now, the ashes. Suge told People magazine that after Shakur passed, his closest friends rolled him up. They smoked him. A symbolic ritual, he said, a way to keep part of him inside them forever. And while it sounds like urban myth, insiders close to the death row camp confirm that something did happen that night, involving Shakur's remains. A bag passed around, a circle formed, a moment too sacred or too chaotic to ever make it to official records. But it wasn't just bizarre. It was grief, reimagined through loyalty, trauma, and legend.
I'm not the guy who's here for Puffy's downfall, but I am the guy who supports the victims who got victimized, right?
We don't often talk about what fame does to mourning. Shakur wasn't just their brother, he was their movement. And when he was gone, they didn't just lose a friend, they lost the crown jewel in their empire. So they turned to symbolism, ritual, smoke, and memory. Suge admitted he didn't take part, but he understood why they did it, because when everything feels like it's been taken from you, your voice, your freedom, your story, you hold on however you can, even if it's through fire. It's no coincidence that Suge's been retelling these stories now. Not years ago, not from the comfort of a memoir or biopic, but now from a prison cell, over crackling phone lines and guarded interviews. Because the people he's talking about, they're still active, still powerful, still sitting in boardrooms, running labels, flipping artists into icons. The Diddy trial isn't just about one man's fall, it's a mirror, and Suge's using it to reflect back everything he claims he saw and everything we weren't supposed to know.
Got it. So you're saying Diddy's an FBI informant and he's been one for many years?
How would they say? Nothing ever happens, but it's still, like I say, angel.
The timing of Suge Knight's failed legal appeal couldn't have been more revealing. Just as his voice began reaching new audiences through his podcast and phone interviews, his last remaining lifeline, a writ of habeas corpus, meant to challenge the legality of his 28-year sentence, was slammed shut. The court didn't just reject it, it dismantled it. The judge described Knight's claims as insincere, his timeline as suspicious, and his arguments as lacking merit. On paper, it read like a simple procedural denial, but between the lines, many saw something more calculated, the slow legal smothering of a man who wouldn't stay quiet. Inside the courtroom, Knight's team argued that his deteriorating health, his vision loss, and the isolating conditions of his confinement had robbed him of the ability to file earlier. But the court wasn't having it. It pointed out that Knight had filed other motions before, suggesting he knew the system well enough to act sooner. To some, that sounded fair. To others, it sounded like an excuse to deny the one man whose revelations were starting to crack the glossy surface of hip-hop's golden era. A man trapped by bureaucracy, his voice confined to 15-minute phone calls while his enemies moved in silence.
Well, all due respect to Puffy, you gotta realize one thing. He didn't start off like that. I'm quite sure somebody taught him that, and that's more deep in the industry.
Those close to Suge insist the system never gave him a fair chance. They say his plea deal was coerced, that his own defense attorney wasn't prepared to take the case to trial, and that key evidence, including the broader circumstances surrounding the Tams Burgers incident, was never properly explored. But now, even his shot at correcting those alleged injustices has been declared null and void. From the outside, it looks like justice was served. From the inside, it looks like a slow-motion erasure. The legal equivalent of pulling the plug on a man who still has stories left to tell. And it doesn't stop at the court walls. Suge has repeatedly described being kept in near total isolation, with limited access to legal counsel and tight restrictions on his communications. Those conditions, he claims, weren't about safety. They were about containment, keeping him out of reach, keeping him unheard. And in a world where silence is safer than truth, that kind of treatment starts to look less like protocol and more like prevention. The more he tried to fight his sentence, the tighter the net seemed to close. No appeals, no options, and, if the last attack proved anything, no real protection.
If you add all that type of stuff up, and you'll see how the industry been built on the secret rooms.
This failed appeal wasn't just a loss in court. It was a reminder that Suge Knight may be out of the spotlight, but he's far from free. Legally boxed in, physically caged, surrounded by threats, some visible, some cloaked in the very system meant to offer justice. And as his claims keep pushing deeper into taboo territory, the court's refusal to even hear his case adds a dark new chapter to the saga, one where a man with too much knowledge is no longer just an inmate, but an inconvenient archive the system would rather erase than acknowledge. And that's exactly why the recent attack feels so surgical, like a message, not just to Suge, but to anyone else who might be thinking of digging up the old bones. Those camera glitches, the lack of witness IDs, that's not sloppiness, that's strategy. It sends a clear message. We can reach anyone, anywhere, even behind locked doors, even under watch, even when the whole world's listening.
That boy life is dangerous. His life isn't, and he's just not dangerous with the shit they said he was doing, but he's in danger. He knows too much.
But here's the twist. Suge keeps talking. He's not backing down. If anything, he's doubling down. On his podcast and interviews, he's hinting that there's still more, that the walls are full of whispers and he remembers every one of them. From label politics to street politics, from Dre's alleged deals to what went down the night Shakur took his final breath. Whether it's fact, fiction, or something in between, Suge's voice is still echoing. And maybe that's what scares them the most. So what happens next? How many more names are etched into Suge's memory? How many secrets have yet to surface? And most importantly, how far will the powers that be go to silence the last man who knows how the game was really played? Let us know what you believe. Is Suge just spinning tales to stay relevant? Or are we finally seeing the truth leak through the cracks of hip-hop's glittering empire? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, not all ghosts wear chains. Some just pick up the phone.